Previously on Desperate Housewives.
More years, come on everybody, more years, come on everybody, more years. Woo! There will be another USA, freedom for the combat, give it away. Time to vote, it's time to pray. Join everyone, let me hear you say, go Trump, 2020, go Trump, 2020, go Trump, 2020. Vote Trump! Keep America great! Keep America great! Woo!
People of Earth, how are you?
Broadcasting live to tape from the Society Theater in the dirtiest city in the world, outside of Italy, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The podcast for a world gone mad. You're listening to the Society Show.
You know, we're living in a society.
On today's episode, we go over a new graph which claims San Francisco is the most intensely gentrified city in the U.S. after Washington, D.C. had been in the lead for several years. How can San Francisco be the most gentrifying city in America when it's already the haven for the richest people in the world? And we're also going to talk about some news stories. There was, of course, the clash between India and China at the border that resulted in many deaths. Remember back in April, the Nova Scotia shooter? Maclean's magazine from Canada is reporting that case has the hallmarks of an RCMP, you know, the Mounties, an RCMP undercover operation. He got a bunch of money from the bank in cash, and there was no holds on it, which is typical of some type of undercover agent. He also had a ton of Mountie paraphernalia. Also, Donald Trump said he heard, quote, interesting things about aliens. We'll talk a little bit about that. But most of what we're talking about on this episode will be a small news segment that Vice News did on a Mormon archaeologist who wants to turn Mayan ruins El Mirador into a privately owned, amusement park resort. And I thought this story was pretty disgusting in several ways, so I'm going to really dig deep into this news segment from Vice. But first, it's time to go over some news, some international news, some interesting news. So we're going to do the Facts and Logic Report.
Facts don't care about your feelings. Facts don't care about your feelings. These are facts.
The number of refugees worldwide has doubled in a decade, UN report says. That's from the New York Times. It says nearly 80 million people, or 1% of humanity, now qualify as refugees, asylum seekers, or internally displaced.
I got a bad feeling about this.
Syrians, Venezuelans, Afghans, South Sudanese, and stateless Rohingya from Myanmar top the list of 79.5 million refugees, asylum seekers, and internally displaced, it said in its annual flagship report. It says about 73% of refugees seek asylum in a neighboring country, defying, they say populists, I'm not going to use that word, defying the right-wing notion that they fled to the West, Mr. Grandi said. Here's the thing with populism. I've been seeing a lot of stuff online about how, oh, there's the populist left, the populist right, with the populist left and right have to work together. Then you also see stuff like in the New York Times. They'll always use populist to mean right-wing and xenophobic. And I don't really know what it means for there to be a populist left and populist right when presumably the left would not have these like xenophobic positions about refugees, especially not even just immigrants but refugees. So I'm really sick of the use of the word populist. Like I am left wing, and I assume everyone who's left wing is a populist in the most traditional use of the word. And I don't feel like I have any allegiance to right wingers who call themselves populists. That's kind of a detour, but that's just been a point of discourse online recently. I just think the idea of referring to someone primarily in a political sense as a populist doesn't really mean anything. Like, that could mean anything.
What do you mean?
Let's move on. So, Germany's top prosecutor accused Russia of ordering the murder of a man in a Berlin park in 2019. The victim was a 40-year-old Georgian citizen of Chechen descent. He was riding his bike through the park and got shot. That is an interesting story, could be true. I know that right-wing Germans right now are not into the idea that Trump is thinking about removing the U.S. military from Germany, because mostly right-wing Germans, I don't think left-wing Germans are particularly pro-U.S., but right-wing Germans like the idea of the U.S. being in Germany to protect against Russia. And so I guess it seems like right now there's increased tension between the U.S. or Germany and Russia. But at the same time, like, Russia did just build a giant pipeline for gas to Germany, or maybe I forget exactly, but there is this like new oil trade from Germany and Russia because it's so much more convenient to get oil from Russia if you're in Europe or Asia than getting it from the United States. It just makes sense, but the U.S. treats it like an affront to the U.S. sovereignty or some shit.
Das ist wunderbar. Wir sind vielleicht noch lange hier und darauf trinken wir.
Our next story, 3 men were arrested on terrorism charges at Las Vegas protests, and they face up to 30 years in prison.
Stop! You violated the law.
The 3 men tied to the white extremist group known as Boogaloo were arrested at a Las Vegas protest in downtown for trying to exploit the demonstration with violence, and they have been indicted by a federal grand jury. According to allegations within the indictment, the 3 suspects are admitted members of the Boogaloo movement, which is a term used by extremists to signify a coming civil war and collapse of society. This is all just kind of like 4chan type shit. I don't even want to say more about it because who cares? But this is pretty crazy story. It says From April to May 30th, the day of their arrest, the three conspired to damage and destroy buildings and property owned by the U.S. government using fire and explosives. When they were arrested, officers found the Molotov cocktails, which were intended to be thrown at the police during the George Floyd protests. So this is all pretty interesting. I don't know how they thought the Molotov cocktails were going to be thrown at police, but I mean, maybe they could figure it out. The thing that's crazy to me is, if convicted, they face up to 30 years in prison each and $500,000 fines. That seems like a huge punishment, and I'm not saying they don't deserve a huge punishment. I mean, like, what they were plotting to do is fucked up. At the same time, I feel like white supremacists do shit like this all the time, or far-right agitators. They do shit like this all the time, and most of the time it's just like shoot off or swept under the rug, not talked about. Either way, I'm very glad that they're indicted.
Your campaign of terror, murder, mayhem will not be tolerated any longer.
A clash on Monday night, Monday of last week, left dozens of Indian Army and Chinese People's Liberation Army members dead, and it raised the prospect of an all-out war between the world's two most populous countries and rival nuclear-armed powers.
Oh, hell, let's just do what we always do. Hijack some nuclear weapons and hold the world hostage.
Since the clash, both Beijing and New Delhi have committed to disengaging the military forces now deployed in close quarters along their disputed border into a peaceful diplomatic solution to their rival territory claims, but each is adamant that the other provoked the clash, the first fatal encounter between Indian and Chinese troops in 45 years.
It's been a while.
Basically, this seems like a pretty... If you read the story, it's a pretty crazy story. People beating each other with, like, clubs. It was just like a brawl, and dozens of people died. There wasn't shooting. I don't really know what to make of the situation. Like, obviously it has really bad and kind of scary implications for global politics, geopolitics. But the thing that's more interesting about it than that is the pure, intimate barbarism of, like, killing people with clubs on a mountain. It, like, seems like something out of a movie more than it seems like a geopolitical event. Like, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I just don't even really have much to say about it, because it's just so weird and surreal.
Feels really weird. Feels really weird.
Here's an article by the Globe and Mail, the Canadian website and news source. It says, Canadians are promoting right-wing extremism in thousands of conversations that are openly taking place on the internet, a new study finds.
Because if there's a Canadian, there has to be a Tim's.
On Friday, the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, a British-based think tank, released the findings in a 46-page report titled An Online Environmental Scan of Right-Wing Extremism in Canada. Quote, we identified 6,660 right-wing extremist channels, pages, groups, and accounts, the study says. The Canadian activity reaches an audience of millions of people. Blah, blah, blah. Now, the article, in a way, it isn't that informative because it kind of implies that Canadians are disproportionately far-right ideologues on the internet. But I don't know if that's actually true. It simply says there are a lot of Canadians who are far-right ideologues on the internet. But if you're familiar with right-wing personalities online, you will know a lot of them are Canadian, and it's kind of strange. Like, I never really got why that is, but it is certainly true, and it's a thing that many people have noticed and commented on. So, and frankly, I'll give my perspective on it. This is just a total guess, could be completely wrong. If you're a right-wing Canadian ideologue, where are you supposed to go? Like, your views are, of course, accepted with some Canadians in some sense, but in terms of right-wing ideology, there's a huge audience in America. Much larger audience of right-wing ideologues in America than Canada. So, it's a bigger market to penetrate in the most simplest forms. And you don't even have to go to America. All you have to do is read American news, which, with the America-centrism of both the world, but especially North America, it's really not hard to do that if you're Canadian. So, that's a sad but interesting story. Lots of right-wing bozos all over the internet from Canada. Now, the Nova Scotia shooter case has hallmarks of an undercover operation. Let me pull this up.
Pull it up so we can see. Are you bringing it up, Jamie?
This is by McLean's. It says, police sources say the killer's withdrawal of $475,000 was highly irregular in how an RSMP agent would get money. Gabriel Wortman, who is responsible for the largest mass killing in Canadian history, withdrew the money from a Brinks depot in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia on March 30th, stashing a carry-all filled with $100 bills in the trunk of his car. Sources in both banking and the RCMP say the transaction is consistent with how the RCMP funnels money to its confidential informants and agents and is not an option available to private banking customers. Then the article gets into Gabriel Wortman's, the shooter's, who happened to have a lot of RCMP Mountie paraphernalia in his home, and he claimed to be a private collector. It says, court documents show Wortman owned a New Brunswick-registered company called Berkshire Broman, the legal owner of two of his vehicles, including one of his police replica cars. Whatever the purpose of that company, there is no public evidence that it would have been able to move large quantities of cash. Wortman also ran his own denturist business, and there is no reason to believe it also would require him to handle large amounts of cash. So he basically had no reason to have the cash. And he got it the way an agent does. The article continues, if Wortman was an RCMP informant or agent, it could explain why the force appeared not to take action on complaints about his illegal guns and his assault on his common-law wife. So the guy had illegal guns. People knew enough to complain about it. He beat his wife, and they did nothing about it. He was basically protected. A Mountie familiar with the techniques used by the force in undercover operations, but not with the details of the investigation into the shooting, says Wortman could not have collected his own money from Brinks as a private citizen. He added that Wortman's transaction is consistent with the Mountie's experience in how the RCMP pays its assets. I've worked a number of CI cases over the years, and that's how things go. All the payments are made in cash. To me, that transaction alone proves he has a secret relationship with the force, end quote. Now, the obvious question here you have to ask yourself is, Was this guy a secret agent and he went on a killing spree in his private life? Or was the killing spree part of what he was being paid to do? Do you think he wanted to die? And they were like, hey, before you die, go on a killing spree. I don't know how else to understand this. It defies conventional understanding.
Or am I so sane that you just blew your mind?
Because if there's a Canadian, there has to be a Tim's.
As a bit of a palate cleanser, I have this article that says, Donald Trump says he heard, quote, interesting things about aliens, but refuses to reveal secrets of Roswell UFO site. So his son, Don Jr., asks Trump if he'll ever consider, quote, letting us know there's aliens. This is the only thing I really want to know. Would you ever open up Roswell and let us know what's really going on? And let's see how Trump replied. Responding to his son, the president said, quote, so many people... Let me put on my Trump impression. So many people ask me that question. It sounds like a cute question. There are millions and millions of people who want to go there, who want to see it. I won't talk to you about what I know about it, but it's very interesting. I'll have to think about it. Sorry, my Trump always sounds very like flamboyant because whenever I do an impression, I always go in a kind of higher pitch on accident. So, very interesting, folks. Big time aliens, folks. Very interesting. And one more alien story to carry on the theme. This article from livescience.com, quote, it's not ours. Government denies knowledge of strange UFO over Japanese city. A strange balloon-like UFO appeared in the sky over the city of Sendai, Japan, June 7th around 7 a.m. It remains a mystery a full day after its sudden arrival. The object looked like a large, white, unmanned balloon attached to two cross propellers, according to news reports. The UFO lingered in the sky, largely motionless, for several hours before drifting over the Pacific Ocean. I'm watching a video of this balloon right now. But, yeah, I just watched the video. I mean, it looks like a weather balloon, but it was denied by the weather people, so who knows? It's probably nothing, though.
Japan. All that stuff came from Japan.
So I wanted to talk about this graph that I found particularly interesting. So it's a new graph. It's brand new, actually. But it analyzes 2013 to 2017. So in the intro, when I was like, how could San Francisco be the head of the gentrification map? In their defense, it was, like I said, from 2013 to 2017. Which makes sense, except San Francisco was already insanely rich even before 2013. So, although, I mean, it is just kind of increasing, and I don't know how long it will increase, but that's where we're at with that. I'm going to go over the most intensely gentrifying cities between 2013 2017. Number 1, San Francisco / Oakland.
If you're going to San Francisco, be sure to wear some flowers in your hair.
In a sense, that totally makes sense. It seems like a very gentrified, completely gentrified, although I am surprised it's number one because it was already so gentrified. At number 2, we have Denver, Colorado.
I'm about a mile high in Denver where the rock meets timberline.
That makes sense to me. I've been to Denver. It's cool. I like it, but I may be a little surprised, but maybe it's just because I don't know enough about Denver. 3, Boston. That makes sense. 4, Miami. That also kind of makes sense, but I guess I don't think about Miami a whole lot. Probably because I think the type of people who move there are not the type of people I hang out with. I don't really like go clubbing or go to the beach, so who knows. Then number 5, New Orleans. That makes sense.
This time I'm walking to New Orleans.
6, Austin, Texas.
The stars at night are big and bright. Deep in the heart of Texas.
That makes sense. 7, New York City.
Welcome to New York. It's been waiting for you. Welcome to New York. Welcome to New York.
Makes sense. 8, San Jose.
Do you know the way to San Jose? I've been away so long.
That one surprised me because, in a way, San Jose, if San Jose gets gentrified, it's really more like suburbanization than gentrification. San Jose is a suburb of San Francisco. Then after that, we have Phoenix, Sacramento, Minneapolis, Indianapolis. Who the hell is moving to Indianapolis? Then Washington, D.C., San Diego, Los Angeles, Chicago, Philadelphia, Detroit, Dallas, boo. So there are 2 things that were completely shocking to me about this. Is the fact that Seattle and Portland aren't on this map. Or on this list. I don't really get how that's possible. Like, Philadelphia is on it at the very end, and I'll be honest, I lived in Portland before I lived in Philadelphia. I grew up in the Northwest, been to Seattle a ton. Like I said, I'm actually moving back to Seattle in August. So the society show will be relocated. But I have experience in Portland and Seattle, and they're both filled with way more of that gentrification-ass style building than Philadelphia is. Philadelphia has a lot of it, but Seattle, it's like everything, like half the city is like the gentrification-ass buildings. But the people who published this, they made a map, so I'm pulling this up. I'm going to see, because the way their map is counted is basically, there's 3 categories. Central City Opportunity Zone, which I think means an area that they want to gentrify or could gentrify. Then eligible tracts, which basically mean places that they could gentrify or poor enough that you could gentrify, they just haven't yet. And then gentrified tracts, which are places that are gentrified. So let me look at Philadelphia, for example, because that is where the Society Show records. Let's see. So, in terms of the so-called opportunity zones in Philadelphia, it's basically most of North Philly and most of West Philly, part of South Philly, but really only the black parts of South Philly. Whoa. So basically, I'm looking at this map, and it more or less directly corresponds with race, not exactly. They want to develop Fishtown and Port Richmond, which are mostly white neighborhoods, but they want to develop all the black areas of West Philly, which is pretty much all of it except where the universities are. They want to develop Point Breeze, which is the primarily black part of South Philly. They want to develop Brewery Town, Strawberry Mansion, all up along Broad Street. Sorry for talking so much about Philly if you don't know. But those are opportunity zones where they want to gentrify. But then if you look at where is gentrified, it's kind of inconsistent. Like, they don't consider Brewery Town gentrified yet. But if you've been to Philly, the Brewery Town's the neighborhood that's like in inner northwest Philly. It's in North Philly, but right by West Philly, right by the bridge over to West Philly. It's traditionally been a neighborhood that is right on the border of like the black neighborhood, white neighborhood. Mostly been black, but a little bit of white people, and it is definitely gentrifying. I guess it just hasn't gentrified enough for them to consider it gentrified. They do consider Fishtown gentrified, that's true. They consider most of South Philly, especially the southeast, like, quadrant of South Philly gentrified. That makes sense. So I guess that makes sense, but it's a little bit off. Let me check Seattle. So for Seattle, the quote-unquote opportunity zones are the industrial area, I guess they call it SoDo, the area around the parks and the industrial area below it, the International District, the area east of First Hill into Central District, into North Beacon Hill, and then some in far south Seattle like Rainier Valley. The areas that they consider already gentrified are up in North Seattle, kind of by Northgate, like I guess the Greenwood area, a little north of the Greenwood area, behind North Seattle College. They consider, I guess, the area around Denny Park, like South Lake Union, gentrified. That makes sense because that is where a ton of Amazon offices are. And then they consider parts of West Seattle gentrified. I really don't get this map. Like, I really do not get it. So I guess that explains why Seattle's not in the top. Now let's look at Portland. And I'm sorry if this is boring to you guys. I like talking about cities. Even if you don't know about any of these cities, then I think maybe you still might get something out of it. Okay. So Portland, Oregon. I'm looking at it now. So the areas that they say are opportunity zones are basically Southwest Portland, which is where downtown is. Northwest Portland, which is where the Pearl District is. Inner Southeast, and the Lloyd Center area. Now, if you know Portland, those areas are already like the core of the city. They're not the main places where people usually hang out, although Southeast Portland is, but they're like the industrial core and where the skyscrapers are, where the amenities are. It's weird that they see these as opportunity zones because as far as I can tell, they're about as developed as they come. The supposed eligible tracks for gentrification are parts of North Portland and deep southeast Portland, like Felony Flats area. The parts that have been gentrified are, these make more sense than the Seattle ones. The areas around Mississippi. The areas up into northeast, like around Alberta. The areas around like it's just south of Division. Yeah, the Division neighborhoods, Woodstock neighborhoods by Reed College, kind of down by Milwaukee, and what's it called? What's this neighborhood called? Selwood. Yeah, I used to work by Selwood. So, yeah, the Portland one in some ways doesn't make sense, but it does make more sense than the Seattle one. So, my point being, I don't really know how they determine what's gentrification and what's not, but I don't really have the same standards that they do. But then again, I have to remember this is between 2013 and 2017. It's not contemporary. So, if you're interested in looking into this information, it was made by the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, which is a very gentrification-y sounding name. Maybe they're anti-gentrification, but it doesn't sound like it. Reinvestment is gentrification. That's another word for it. But yeah, I was looking at all this information on their website, ncrc.org. Vice News released a video called, quote, Mayan ruins in Guatemala could become a U.S.-funded tourist attraction. In it, Vice interviews and discusses Mormon archaeologist and professor at the University of Utah, Richard Hansen. Richard Hansen intends to claim the late classic Maya ruins of El Mirador in the vast forests around it as his own private property and turn it into Disneyland. So I'm going to play a couple clips from this news segment and then talk about each.
Every year, 2 million tourists visit Guatemala.
There's one baby.
Yes, it's a skyscraper.
Oh my.
Many come to see the Mayan pyramids.
This represents the sun. This represents the moon.
More tourists come to Tikal than any other Guatemalan site. And a number are members from one particular group. And you're from?
We're from Utah.
Utah, fantastic. The Church of Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormon Church.
I wear undergarments underneath my clothing for religious purposes.
The sights we will see are things that are talked about in the Book of Mormon. It gives us a better appreciation for the things that we're reading when we see what the country was like.
Absolutely. Some Mormons believe their ancestors migrated from the Holy Land to Mesoamerica and built some of the pyramids.
Whoa! 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 There they are. There's Carol. Because we're here in what we would call the East Wilderness of the Book of Mormon, I just want to share a scripture that took place in the East Wilderness. What we would call the East Wilderness of the Book of Mormon. What we would call the East Wilderness of the Book of Mormon.
The fact that Dr. Richard Hansen is Mormon plays into this. The documentary won't talk a ton more about it than this opening segment, so I wanted to flesh out the Mormon element. Basically, the crucial theological shift from mainstream Christianity to Mormonism is that Mormons believe that after Jesus was crucified and resurrected, he came to the Americas. Mormons also believe that a man named Lehi, who predated Jesus by hundreds of years, fled Judea after it was conquered by Babylon and came to the Americas with his family. Because of this, Mormons believe that at least some indigenous Americans are descendants of Mormon prophets. There's also debate about the geographical setting of the Book of Mormon. The book is set in the Americas, but refers to places using names that sound like they're out of a fantasy novel, like Quaba Baba, blah 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 blah, Caledonia Land, Hueswapopado. All types of just like names like that. This means people don't know what geography is specifically being referred to in the Book of Mormon. There are several different theories about where the locations refer to because nothing fits entirely right. All that I'm saying is based on surface level internet research, but it's just how I've come to understand it. So, if you have any insight into Mormonism or anything that I'm missing, be sure to email us at societyshowpodcast@gmail.com. But here's what I've read so far and how I understand it. Most Mormons, if you take the Book of Mormon literally, interpret the geography of the book as referring to a limited geographical realm to help explain geographical inconsistencies. And some Mormons entertain the idea that the limited geography of the Americas described in the Book of Mormon is the Maya area. It seems like believing that the Book of Mormon took place in Mesoamerica is somewhat fringe. Or it seems like something that more Mormons believe than you'd think. It just doesn't come up much. It kind of reminds me of Christians who are young earth creationists. A lot of Christians actually do believe it. It's just, it doesn't really come up much, and it's not a culture war issue like it was in the 2000s. So, yeah, I think the Book of Mormon, a lot of people have different ideas about where it's set. Some people think it's set in like Western New York. Some people think it's set in the Great Lakes region. Some people think it's set in Mesoamerica. And a lot of people have different ideas. So that just kind of fleshes that out. And having said all that, I'm not sure how seriously popular the belief is, but it does exist. Now, what I'll say about it is Mormonism is like perfectly infused with settler capitalism because America was settled and colonized by Europeans. And Mormons can't deal with that. They need to reconcile the settler colonialism with the native population. They need to feel justified in settling. And how can you justify that? If you believe the people who were already there were the same as you, then you aren't a settler, it's a homecoming. It's the same ideology that Zionism is rooted in, which is basically they're returning to their homeland, even though it really hasn't been their homeland, sadly, for like 2,000 years, but for many Jews, even longer than that. But Mormonism, it's even more nonsensical because obviously Mesoamericans weren't descended from Mormon prophets.
Archaeologists didn't start seriously excavating here until the late 70s. Brigham Young University, a Mormon institution, funded the first dig. Richard Hanson, the director of El Mirador's archaeological project and a devout Mormon, first arrived with those early excavation projects.
So this really shows the academic university to capitalist development pipeline. I mean, it's not a pipeline like the school to prison. It's not like this type of thing is happening all the time, but it does happen. And it's one of the many ways large international capitalist power structures always find a way to exploit people in other parts of the world. This dude is using an academic university doing archaeological resource to wiggle his way into the society. And then 20 years later, he's trying to make it his own private property. So how, people say imperialism is the highest form of capitalism. What they mean by that is that once capitalism develops enough in a domestic market, it needs to expand by exporting capital to other parts of the world. Imperialism is the highest form of capitalism because capital will always have a tendency to export itself more capital to grow markets and increase profits. So we live in a post-colonial world in the most literal sense of colonial, that capital still needs to function by expanding outward in the same way colonialism did. That's what it means when people say imperialism is the highest form of capitalism. It's when capital has a moment of crisis, turns to finance, and then begins exporting capital to sustain itself.
Well, it's a 2 to 3 day hike one way in here. It's pretty rugged to get in here, or you take a helicopter, which takes a lot of money. If we put roads in here, the narcos will control them. The only thing that we found that works, that's sustainable, is a miniature train.
I got hit by a train last year while I was walking.
You don't cut a single tree, you go around them, and you go on the ancient causeways. And man, you see the opposition against that. That imperialist gringo, he wants to get rich off of us.
Fucking asshole!
You know, these people are so...
I don't believe you people.
Huh? What do you mean, you people?
What do you mean, you people?
Huh?
They don't see the way that... That's one of my criticisms of the Guatemalans. There's no vision.
So when he says he wants to build a train on the ancient causeways, he's referring to Sacbiob, which is plural, or Sacba, singular, which is the name for the ancient roads of the Maya area. Maya built a massive network of roads that had both a functional purpose, obviously, because they were roads, but were also ritualized for the Maya people. They were used for pilgrimages. They often connected temples and religious structures to each other, as well as connecting some cities. The word Sacba means, quote, white road, because the roads were raised and paved with limestone plaster. And the simple truth is, we have no idea how expansive the Sacba network is, because most of it is covered by plants that grew over the roads. But archaeologists know there's a lot of road there from doing radar scans of the forests to find covered structures. So not only is some of the roads completely visible, we know about them, we see them, you could walk on them today. Not only that, but there is more than we even know that is completely covered. And we know that a lot of it is covered and where it is, but not nearly all of it, probably not even most of it. We're still uncovering Maya artifacts and ruins today, like to this day. So Sacba have a lot of importance to contemporary Mayas. Modern Maya people call the Milky Way Sacba, drawing a parallel between their road network and the cosmos. And travel writer and Mayanist John Lloyd Stevens reported in the early 1840s that some Maya people still said a ritual prayer when crossing a Sacba, even though they had been overgrown with jungle for centuries. He discovered evidence of large, well-constructed Sacbiob, which was previously believed to be exaggerations by Spanish conquistadors. All of this to say, the causeways that he wants to build his little Disneyland train on are themselves Maya cultural sites and should be preserved. And then the last stuff he goes into saying these people have no vision or whatever, I mean, I think the level of disdain and hatred he has for the local indigenous population here really speaks for itself.
Hansen says his main goal is to protect the forest.
Sure, Jan.
But his plan would disrupt a program already doing that. The Forestry Concessions Program lets local communities live in the reserve in exchange for protecting it. They work in carpentry and sustainable logging, planting more trees than they cut down, which accounts for more than 80% of their revenue. Hansen's proposal would ban those industries.
So it's clear what he's doing here. It's not like he's trying to ban logging, but that's how he presents it. He can get the most superficial neoliberal environmentalist quote on board by saying, yeah, we're going to save the Guatemalan jungle by not cutting it down. But in reality, that's just a side effect. Because what he really wants to do is rezone the jungle and have part of it be his private property. He would ban logging because he wants all the people who currently work there logging to now be his employees. So what he leaves out when they talk about defending the Guatemalan jungle, the part he doesn't mention is actually building a giant amusement park in the middle of it, building a train all over ancient roadways, and then just let the rest of the forest grow how it would. He doesn't highlight the fact that, oh, I'm actually going to bulldoze acres and acres of the forest to build my hotels and restaurants. And the issue is, Mayas have been cutting down and replanting the jungle for centuries. They know how to do it in a sustainable way that they can still live off of. In fact, we don't really know why the classical Maya collapsed, but many think that at least part of it involved overly deforesting the Maya area and losing some resources as a consequence. So Maya people, after another 1,000 years of farming and forestry, now have a much more successful foresting strategy that is entirely sustainable.
I've been talking for 40 years about the importance of conservation, but now it's gratifying to see that they listen to the message. We don't want to do away with the concessions. They're functioning. They've served to slow down deforestation. Let's keep those concessions there.
And
we support the concession model. But this tree would be worth more standing than it would be cut. That's the difference.
It's all about the money. It's all about the dum-dum-da-da-dum-dum. I don't think it's funny.
The key, so it's said, to the success of the concessions is they have a long-term stake in this thing. They're not just employed by somebody. Can you match or better that sort of stake for the local people?
Of course, because the tourism can generate so much more money than the logging can.
It's all about the money. It's all about the dum-dum-da-da-dum-dum. I don't think it's funny.
Will they have a stake?
Why not?
Is that included in the
you're
proposal?
an entrepreneur. You want to build a $5 million hotel and turn it over to the local campesino and give him $5 million? The local campesino.
Have you ever had something happen that was so racist that you didn't even get mad? You were just like, God damn, that was racist. That was racist. The local campesino.
That doesn't work in the real world.
Those capitalist pigs will pay for their crimes, eh? Hey, comrades, hey?
An accusation, another one that people are throwing around, that for better or for worse, your faith as a member of the LDS is somehow fundamental to your vision.
Oh.
Makes me laugh.
I think some of my colleagues that are Catholic must be looking for the Holy Cross in their sights.
Oh my God, who the hell cares?
Is that asinine? What does my faith have to do with this?
Because people really think that this Mesoamerica and Mayan ruins represent sort of pilgrimage for a lot of Mormons.
No. A lot of Mormons like to come down here, but that's not my agenda at all. Never has been.
So here he starts by implying environmentalists are now following his lead. He's the ultimate champion for the environment, which is obviously just self-aggrandizing crap. He then makes it clear that environmentalism means to him when he can't talk about the environment without talking about how profitable it is or isn't. That is what environmentalism means to him. Like, everything he says about the environment is, oh, it's worth more money like this, it's worth more money like that. That's what the environment means to him. And then he then gets very angry at the idea of giving workers at his resort a stake in the company, mocking the idea of a, quote, local campesino having a stake in a capitalist company.
And it's obviously going to cost a hell of a lot of money. But that leads us to the bill.
Okay.
It's exciting, right?
Well, I am the architect of the bill.
That bill, which would fund Hanson's Park with US taxpayer dollars, is called the Mirador-Calakmul Basin Maya Security and Conservation Partnership Act.
You think that shit's real?
Monday to keep it legal.
Who would do that? Who would do that?
Republican Senator Jim Inhofe is its main sponsor. A passionate anti-environmentalist, he isn't interested in saving the forest.
We keep hearing that 2014 has been the warmest year on record. You know what this is? It's a snowball.
Instead, Inhofe told Vice News he likes the proposal because it would stem immigration to the US.
Have you ever had something happen that was so racist that you didn't even get mad? You were just like, God damn, that was racist.
This shows that this isn't just private pseudo-colonialism. It's also potentially being paid for by the U.S. government with taxpayers' money. The dude sponsoring it is in U.S. Congress, and he says he supports it to curb immigration. Why do you think he thinks this? I'm not positive, but if I had to interpret it, it would be like this. One of the big reasons people immigrate to the U.S. is they can't get work in their home country and they want to work. This is pretty basic stuff. You need to work to live. You can't get work in your home country, so you go to another country. In other words, they come to the U.S. to seek an employer. American capitalism, on one level, wants that because they want to subsume the entire world population into people generating production for the American capitalist machine. But at the same time, the right wing of capital wants to keep those workers where they currently are. They don't want the foreign indigenous workers to be allowed into the imperial core. So you have an American capitalist assimilated indigenous workers into a private capitalist system that supports the U.S. What I'm saying is, you send an American capitalist down to Guatemala, they employ all the Guatemalans there, then those Guatemalans don't feel any need to come to the U.S. That's the reasoning, at least. The U.S. would use taxpayers' money to build this guy a Disneyland in Guatemala because it not only assimilates these small communal indigenous communities into the American capitalist machine, but it keeps them stuck in Guatemala so they don't seek employment in the U.S. Not only that, but it builds up a good way for middle-class Americans to dump their money into this new exotic type of amusement park. It also robs indigenous people of their cultural identity, because a lot of those times indigenous cultural identities clash with the ideological tenets of capitalism. And so here, with all these things I'm saying, you can definitely start to see the same dynamic was at play with good old-fashioned 1700s and 1800s full-blown imperialism. Those things are really at play in this current moment, because all the things that make imperialism work are also fueling this guy. And that about wraps up our show for today. So thank you for listening to the Society Show. My name is Christian Patterson. I am glad to be your host. You may notice this was 1 week after my last episode. Are you wondering if this show's going from bi-weekly to weekly? Well, right now it'll remain bi-weekly unless there's a special circumstance. And I just saw this video, really wanted to make an episode about it. Didn't want to wait, and I had the time, so I made a weekly episode. As I have said before, the Society Show will be moving to Seattle in August. I may miss a few weeks, but I promise when I'll be back, this show is going to be bigger than ever. I want to do at least one episode a week, maybe two. Interested in getting society streams, new microphones, new guests, all that type of stuff. So in the meantime, be sure to follow me on Twitter at ChristianIsCool, at ChristianIzCool. Is spelled I-Z. Christian is cool. You can also email the podcast with any corrections, topics you'd like discussed, or feedback, anything really, at societyshowpodcast@gmail.com, and finally follow the Society Show on Twitter @society_show. Thank you for listening to the Society Show.
Till next time, take care of yourself and each other.
On the next Arrested Development.
That's funny. I've never heard of George Glass at our school.
Dude, what does my tattoo say? Sweet! What about mine? Dude, what does mine say? Sweet! What about mine? Dude, what does mine say? Sweet! What about mine? Dude, what does mine say? Sweet!
Between myself, Ted Cruz, and Rand Paul, who have all grown sort of quarantine beards, who's his best and why?
Well, I don't like it on you, as I've told you.
Yeah.
And I think that's fine if you want to do it. I'm a libertarian in that way. You can do whatever you want. But I don't like it on you.
Dead. Dead. Dead.